Me oh my, it has been a hot minute. As soon as I finished uploading the last video, I immediately went into writing script for the next. However, the script, after the days and now finally weeks, has ballooned to gargantuan proportions. So instead of one long gigantic video, I'm going to be splitting up into a small mini series where we dive into Deadlock, its roster, classes, the shop, and how all of it works together to give you every single bit of detail you might need to win that next game. We're going to dive into 8 specific hero archetypes I've found, how they might break the mold of the traditional tank, DPS, and support roles, and how each plays just a little bit differently throughout a match of Deadlock. Tank, DPS, and support are too broad of a classification, so we really need to divide these up into sub-genres and see how each hero might fit into these sub-genres. And these, however, are by no means a hard codification. I'm just a man with a green screen and a sock for a mic. These are, however, based on MOBA history and seem to be certain roles and playstyles that exist within Dota, League, and now, of course, Deadlock. And along the same lines of this not being a hard codification, every hero in Deadlock wears many hats and so can be played in many different styles of these archetypes. So when I give an example for a hero within, say, the Bruiser archetype, they don't specifically only line the Bruiser archetype, but rather through build crafting and itemization and skill progression could play a Bruiser should they wish. So with all that upfront knowledge and caveats out of the way, here are those 8 hero archetypes that I see in Deadlock and how each one looks to play a game. It's time to Deadlock in. Alright, so first up we have the carry. And in Deadlock we have many different forms of carry. We have gun carries, tank carries, and spirit carries, all of which can carry a game if given the right situation. Carries start out super squishy in the early and mid game, however have the exceptional ability of ramping at a much faster and quicker rate than the majority of other characters. Through souls, itemization, and of course their hero kit, they are fantastic when it comes to clearing the jungle. They want to get in, clear as much and soak as much jungle as possible, get back to that side lane, and continue their ramp unperturbed. If they are able to do this with as little harassment as possible, they are able to get to that later stage much faster and finally carry their team to a victory. In contrast to a traditional hard carry like say Seven or Wraith, we can throw Ivy in there or even a Drifter who excel in becoming carries if they are given that early advantage. Wraith, Seven, and Ivy when played carry usually sit in the jungle and in the side lane. However, in contrast, Shiv and Yamato really excel at the mid-game brawl and if given enough kills can in the end still become a carry. Characters like Wraith, Haze, and Drifter are gonna scale and itemize usually for their gun, so that by the end game they can merely look at you, drop an entire mag, and see your health bar disappear. Spirit carries like GT, Mirage, and Infernus do spirit damage, however maybe not in the same way. GT tries to blow you up with his arrows and bird. Infernus tries to get tick and burn on you. However, both are carries in the sense that they are doing that insane amount of spirit damage in that late game. And again, this is a broad-ranged archetype. Many different characters can become a carry should they wish depending on the game. It's up to you to decide who that character is and in which game they should actually be carrying. The strength in general of carries is their ability to come online and do an immense amount of damage so long as they can get there. Once they fall behind and are seemingly in the middle or at the lower end of the souls pack, they almost entirely fall off the face of the map. On the whole, however, carries are usually very weak and fragile and item dependent, which means that their early and mid game are horrible in contrast to their late game where they fully come online and simply, like I said, wipe entire teams. If you remember nothing else for a carry, just remember they have immense late game potential and rely on their team to handle the majority of brawling and objective taking in that early and middle game. Alright, so after the carry, we have the tanks. These can then be subdivided into initiators and frontliners, or a combination thereof. The whole idea around this archetype is to get in, soak, and deal damage while allowing your backline to do the majority of killing and CCing. That's not to say tanks and initiators don't have CC, usually a lot of their kits do. Think of Abrams, think of Mo and Krill. These characters usually isolate a handful of characters and stun them for a short duration, allowing more damage to come their way. Frontline protectors are slightly different. Abram still falls into this category, but Mo and Krill not so much. We then look to characters like Kelvin or Victor to really just sit there and soak as much damage as possible. Their primary job as a frontliner is to soak that damage, usually for a backline carry. The amount of damage a frontliner can take far surpasses that of, say, a Wraith or a 7, who usually die if focused long enough. So when you combine an Abrams and a 7, you've got your health pool where you need it and your damage at the perfect spot. These characters as well don't play a match of Deadlock in the exact same way. These characters spike during the mid game, where they want to be creating fights, pushing for objectives, and making sure the enemy's carry doesn't get where they want to be. The perfect situation is to find these characters farming in the jungle, initiating on them alongside, say, a carry or a ganker on our team, destroying that character and resetting their souls per minute. This means tank and initiators usually want to be hyper mobile during that mid game, constantly looking for the right fight. And that's the key, taking the right fight. If you initiate on the wrong character or over-initiate by continually taking fights, then your advantage can quickly turn into a disadvantage. Diving into the jungle is all fun and games, but when it results in your death rather than theirs, then it's a serious misplay. This can then result in the other team snowballing a lead due to a result of your over-initiation. The same methodology applies in the late game, however, at that point in the game you don't do as much damage as you once did, and now much more rely on your carry to be outputting that sustained damage. In the late game, the initiators and frontliners are doing exactly that, initiating and soaking damage, much more so than they did in the mid game where they were purely looking for a pick. At this late game stage, they want to be at the center of the fight and hopefully sustaining and taking as much of the enemy team's aggro, allowing the backline carries to get in and do what they need to do. Tank strengths are their high durability and team utility during the fight, which means their weakness is the lack of damage and reliance on their team actually being there. As stated, a tank initiating on the wrong character or at the wrong time without any support usually results in that tank dying rather than the enemy character. All said, tank's job is exactly that, to tank. Take as much damage, take the right fights, and hopefully your team will be there to support you. Up next, we have probably one of my favorite archetypes, that of the assassin. These are usually high burst damage characters that excel in diving in, getting a pick or two, and diving out just as quickly as they got there. They're usually high precision characters. Think about Pocket, Lash, Holiday, Calico. This high burst damage also usually lends it to being a squishy character, heavily reliant on their movement abilities. This is the Pocket Teleport, the Holiday Jump Pad, the Lash Grapple. It allows them hypermobility so that they hopefully don't die after they secure the pick. These characters can also be subdivided into stealth ambushers and more of a brawly type. Holiday usually can't just dive in and get a character by herself. Just dive in, use the lasso, and dive back out, allowing for a pick to come through. This, in contrast to a Pocket or a Lash, usually can dive in, get the pick themselves, and dive out. This archetype and its two subdivisions lends to these characters playing in slightly different ways, however in the end having almost the same goal. Isolate a character, ensure they get taken off the map, and get back to the team. These characters rely on precise aim, fantastic timing, and of course, immaculate map awareness. As well means they have the highest skill floor, requiring at bare minimum a decent knowledge of both the character kit as well as the kit of the character you're diving. If you dive the incorrect character and are immediately CC'd and stunned, this can result in a quick death for these squishy characters. However, if you dive in and know your target can't stop you from diving back out, you have a bit more of a leeway when it comes to securing that kill. This is another form of character that excels in the mid game, constantly roaming around the map looking to hopefully get either the carry or somebody in their jungle. These characters as well usually spike in that mid game alongside our tanks, meaning that they are fantastic pairings to go jungle diving looking to secure a pick. This by no means that they are relying on the tank to secure the pick, but just means that securing that pick is much easier if they are accompanied. They as well can sort of fall off in the late game, where Pocket can do a lot of damage in the mid, usually falls off in the late. The same thing goes with Lash. Once we hit that 20-25 minute mark, he's really only used for his ult. Play these characters only if you know their kit, and of course if you don't, well, You gotta practice, so get in there anyway. But once you excel at the character kit and can read the map well enough, your ability to quickly snowball kills can be a fantastic boon for the team. Just make sure you don't dive into the enemy jungle and die in the enemy jungle. Then, like I said, everything comes crumbling back down. Now that we have assassins down, let's dive to the other end of the spectrum and talk about supports. Supports can then be divided into both healers and what I like to call enablers. Healers, of course, heal the team. Think Kelvin, to an extent Geist, of course, Dynamo. Their ability to heal the team and keep the team fighting means that they are fantastic in the backline. The other side of the coin, we have enablers, who usually don't heal, but have more than enough support utility to keep that same team fight going. Think of characters like Paige, who never outright heals a character, however, through the shield can do so in a proactive way. A Paige shouldn't throw a shield on a character who's already dying. They should have already had the shield on them. Ivy enables through her silences and control of space. Her Kudzu Bomb and ult, when fully upgraded, means that any team fight is much harder for the enemy team. Supports provide healing, buffs, and debuffs for the enemy team, enabling tanks and carries to carry in that later stage of the game. They provide early game influence, a lot of mitigation in the mid game, and in the end game are pivotal for winning teamfights. This, however, means that they don't really scale and always have the utility they need rather than an outright damage buff. As well, they're heavily reliant on their team, much more so than any other archetype that I've seen. When isolated, they usually fall down the quickest out of anybody on the roster. This means that they want to stay in the backline and allow the team to do the majority of the work, enabling them and healing them along the way. These characters are fantastic in lane and usually mean that the lane is going to be won, or at the very least stalled out until gankers and tanks can come to support. In the mid game, they slightly change and want to roam alongside tanks and gankers, making sure they're always topped up and enable them for the picks that they're looking for at that point in the game. They're probably one of the more important roles when it comes to the end game, making sure everybody is where they need to be and at the correct power, hopefully to win that fight. If you enjoy thankless jobs, then this archetype is exactly for you. Your stat line won't be the craziest, but your control and presence on the map will literally win you the game. Again, this isn't a hard codification. You can run a gun Paige, a gun Ivy, a crazy Mystic Burst Doorman. It just means that these characters lend themselves really well to being healers and enablers, and when played in a specific comp can provide immense amount of utility. Support players, we love you, and just know you're probably doing more than you might think. Alright, now that we've covered supports, let's dive back into some damage dealers. We have the Bruiser. These are fighter hybrids that are usually off tanks, not having the highest health pool, but usually having some sort of damage dealing sustain. Think of Billy, Geist, Yamato, who have lifesteal through their interaction with an opponent. They have a fantastic balance between damage and durability. However, if they lean too far on one, usually fall flat on their face. They're both initiators and catch characters, or at least can play like them, following up any low health character who's trying to get away. We have juggernaut duelists like Shiv and Yamato, who really want to take a one-on-one fight and deal as much damage as they can, keeping their health still fairly high, but still not at the point of, say, an Abrams or maybe a Moen Krill. Again, these are off tanks. Think about Billy, who wants to get in and dive, but can fall apart if he's not dealing enough damage or is taking too much damage. They are durable and self-sufficient in small skirmishes. If the fight takes too long, then they really need a primary tank to come in and soak the opponent's damage. They can still provide a lot of damage, however, like I said, just can't be the primary tank. These characters are fairly good in lane, however, usually don't hit their spike till the mid game. They can fall apart in lane if not properly supported and taking too much damage from both characters. Pairing these characters with a support or a longer range damage dealer is usually the best composition. From here, they can secure lane, secure their souls, and start to farm and get those kills. In the mid game, they are very similar to a tank. They want to dive characters alongside a damage dealer and pick off 1 to 2 characters who are too out of position. In the later game, they do fall off when it comes to being a tank and really thrive on the team still being there to support them. As well as stated, if they're not doing damage, they're usually not healing. So taking sustained engagements for too long can be a serious detriment if unchecked. However, if you have a support or a damage dealer, those fights can stay extended. You just have to find that perfect balance between doing damage and staying alive. Off-tank players thrive in that adrenaline spike that comes with just barely making it out alive. This is one of my favorite tank playstyles and allows me to output a crazy amount of damage while also sustaining myself through, again, that usual lifesteal built into each of these kits. Alrighty, now that we've talked about off tanks, let's talk about off carries. These are usually ranged casters who can still output an immense amount of damage. They rely heavily on ability combos and their positioning in order to outplay their opponent. These are characters like Grey Talon, Mirage, and Mina, who still put a crazy amount of damage out onto the field even though they might not be the team's win condition. As well, these characters are excellent split pushers through the majority of their ultimates, allowing them to be hyper mobile or at least have presence around the map. Grey Talon, although he might not sit in a side lane, can still clear a side lane if he needs to with his ultimate. Mirage can push a side lane and then teleport to a team fight if needed. Mina is a bit different though. Although she might not be a fantastic split pusher, she is still an off carry in the sense that she has an immense amount of damage and can carry a game if needed. This archetype suffers from many of the same weaknesses as the traditional hard carry. They're usually quite weak in lane and don't really come online to the mid or even late mid game. They are, however, usually the stabilizers for that mid game. They usually keep characters at bay and keep the game state at an equilibrium while the full carry, hard carry, gets fully online. These characters as well are heavily cooldown dependent, meaning that if they spam all of their abilities, they're usually sitting ducks for the next 10 to 15 seconds. Any type of CC, a root, or stun can keep them there long enough for a single or even duo to kill them and take them out of the map. All of the same through lines of the carry come back into the off carry, except as stated, they aren't necessarily the win condition. If you want to play this off carry, make sure you're still leading in the souls pack. Obviously delegating the majority of the souls to your hard carry, though you still want to keep your numbers high. Should the hard carry fall behind in souls, then they can definitely take that place. However, it's not exactly where they want to be. Whereas hard carries usually have no problem 1v2ing or even 3ing in the late game, off carries still struggle in that late game and usually just have the ability to take out one character. You should play off carry if you're cool with doing a crazy amount of damage, but just not taking that #1 position on the podium. Up next, we have the penultimate archetype of the Deadlock rosters, that of the controller. Controllers, disruptors, zoners, whatever you want to call them, in essence, their core idea is to shape a fight. They want to cut off sight lines, deny areas of attack, and push objectives or defend objectives. You can probably think of some key characters. Think Dynamo, McGinnis, Kelvin, Doorman, even Paradox to an extent. All of these characters revolve around shaping the space around them. They might not be the highest damage dealers, but they can sure control a fight so that the fight plays out the way the team wants. This archetype is often overlooked by players in favor of more DPS heavy archetypes. However, they are the key to winning a game. They use traps, summons, persistent effects, and hopefully shape the battlefield in the best way into win the fight, to win the macro play, and finally win the game. These characters usually suffer from a lack of mobility, however, and can be caught out if misplayed. Think of how vulnerable McGinnis is, the archetypal controller in Deadlock. She suffers from the inability to escape if things go awry. She has her turrets and her wall, and these are fantastic for zoning and keeping people at space, but once she doesn't have any backup and the enemy is pushing her, she has nowhere to go. These characters are usually very highly predictable, and so as stated are easy to catch out of position. The key is these characters are heavily dependent on the team coordinating correctly. Much like a tank who wants to take space, controllers who want to control space can only do so if the damage is there to win the fight. A stun, a root, or any form of CC is really moot if there's no way to follow up. These characters usually don't have trouble in lane or even the mid game and are fantastic in the end game if played correctly. They are one of the more, if not the most, stable archetype in this entire lineup, however, yet again, suffer from that predictability. Though don't get it twisted though, a McGinnis can still carry a game. It's just that when played in a professional comp setting or alongside a fantastic team comp that already has damage there, her best usage is to be that controller. These characters, when paired with another damage character, are fantastic off-lane duos and can usually take objectives at an early rate. This also means that they're fantastic at defending objectives and should almost always be there when a walker push is incoming. These characters win objectives, win mid-boss fights, and of course, usually win earn. The major caveat though is you have to know when and where to use their abilities. Using a CC usually results in a high cooldown, and so if it's misplaced or doesn't proc correctly, then it's really just a waste. You can add damage through other abilities or even your gun, however that's not why you're there. You're there to control the zone. This is yet again a thankless job, much like the supports, and you won't have the craziest stat line. However, you will be the key to winning a game. And finally, rounding out our archetype lineup, we have the Specialist. These are characters that defy traditional norms when it comes to Deadlock and usually have a hyper-unique playstyle. There's really only a handful of them that I can count. I see Lash, Doorman, Sinclair, and Mirage as our 4 main heroes in this category. Each one of these has a fairly unique playstyle. Think of Lash for an example. He is a hyper-mobile character that almost is always in the air, and all of his abilities are highly telegraphed, so he's highly predictable. However, a fantastic Lash, I don't need to tell you, is a menace in lobbies. Doorman's specialization is literally sending people to another section of the map inaccessible unless you're ulted by him. Mirage has a global ultimate that allows him to be basically anywhere at any time so long as his ult is up. Sinclair is wholly dependent on the enemy roster, really only getting utilization if you're trying to copy somebody on the roster that you couldn't get. Each of these characters' playstyles are highly specific and require that you know that character to a decent extent to get any usage out of them. As well, each of these characters is usually easily read. Lash has one of the highest telegraphed skill sets in the entire game. His slam gives you a couple of seconds before he actually gets to you. His ultimate has a bell that goes off before he can even attach to you. These specialists have highly unique playstyles and no single one plays like any other, hence the name Specialist. A Lash's lane isn't nearly as good as, say, a Doorman or Sinclair, who both excel in lane. However, Lash is essential when it comes to the endgame looking for those team-wide ultimates. If you want to see Deadlock from a different angle, then try one of these heroes. As I said, they are hyper unique and open your eyes to what Deadlock really holds in store. Each of these characters require a base level of mastery, and even then, Lash, Sinclair, and Doorman can still be countered through counterspell. So the next time you hop on, have some fun and try out a Specialist. Hey, you made it to the end of the video. Unfortunately, there's no pot of gold back here, but there are a couple YouTube buttons that I wouldn't be offended if you touched. Outside of that, thanks for stopping by. Hope you laughed, hope you loved, and go flame me in the comments for some of my hot takes, like Lady Geist as healer? What the hell was that? Either way, like I said, thanks for stopping by. I got even more coming to you this very next week, so do stay tuned. Outside of that, well, there's nothing else to do but for me to Deadlock out.